Step out of the vehicle, right now.
Sheriff, you need to contact the FBI field office before you touch anything here.
You do not sit in my county, refuse my questions, and hide behind a badge.
This is a federal matter. Verify it.
Turn around, you are being
If
detained.
you cuff me, you are interfering with an active federal investigation.
The sheriff kept asking the same question, only louder each time. He wanted to know why an unmarked black SUV had been parked near the old feed mill for almost 40 minutes. He wanted the driver's phone. He wanted the keys. He wanted the vehicle opened. The man behind the wheel stayed calm and told him the same thing he had already told the deputy. This involved a federal matter, and the sheriff needed to contact the FBI field office before touching anything inside that vehicle. That answer did not land well. Sheriff Wade Miller stood beside the driver's window with 2 deputies behind him and his body camera recording from the center of his chest. He had the posture of a man used to people folding once he got close enough. But the driver didn't fold. He kept both hands visible. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue in circles. He only repeated that the sheriff was about to interfere with an active federal investigation. Miller took that as a challenge. A few seconds later, he ordered the man out of the SUV. The driver stepped out slowly and warned him again that this was bigger than a county traffic stop. Miller ignored that warning. Then the cuffs went on. And that was the moment Sheriff Miller accidentally arrested Special Agent Marcus Hale, an undercover FBI agent working a case that was already circling closer to Miller's own department than anyone in that county knew. Before we get into how it all fell apart, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your state or country in the comments, and if you like stories about power, accountability, and people finally getting exposed on their own cameras, hit like and subscribe. Now, here's how this started. Claiborne County, Georgia was the kind of place where the sheriff's name carried more weight than the county commission. It wasn't a big city department with layers of oversight and reporters camped outside headquarters. It was a rural sheriff's office with one main station, a handful of patrol zones, and a local government that had spent years avoiding open conflict with Wade Miller. Miller had been sheriff for 17 years. People who liked him called him firm. People who had dealt with him on the wrong night had a different opinion. They said his deputies didn't ask questions so much as test how much pressure a person would take. Traffic stops ran long. Searches happened after people said no. Complaints disappeared into internal review and came back with the same finding almost every time: unfounded. That word had protected Miller's office for years. By the time the FBI started looking around Claiborne County, they weren't there because of one bad stop or one angry citizen. Federal investigators had been tracking a larger pattern involving seized cash, towing contracts, missing evidence, and a private security company that seemed to keep winning county work without a clean explanation. Marcus Hale was assigned undercover because he didn't look like what people expected from a federal agent. He was in his early 40s, calm, careful, and easy to underestimate. That was useful. He could sit in a diner for an hour and look like a contractor waiting on a job. He could walk through an equipment auction and pass as a buyer. He could listen without making people feel watched. That evening, Hale was in Claiborne to observe the old Barlow feed mill. The building had been shut down for years, but it still had activity. Trucks came through after dark. Men met there without going inside. Sometimes items moved from one vehicle to another in the gravel lot. Nothing obvious enough for a takedown yet, but enough to matter. Hale parked his unmarked SUV off County Road 14 at 6:38 p.m. He had a secured radio, 2 phones, a small camera setup, and case material that local officers had no business seeing. His job was simple: watch, record, and wait for a target connected to the county's contract network. At 6:51, Deputy Calvin Roach drove past. Roach was one of Miller's most loyal deputies. Not the smartest one in the building, not the most disciplined, but loyal, and in Miller's office that counted for a lot. Roach slowed when he saw the SUV. Then he kept going. A minute later, he turned around. Hale saw the cruiser come back in his mirror and already knew this might become a problem. He didn't reach for anything. He didn't start the engine. He waited. Roach pulled in behind him and turned on the lights. On the body camera, the first part looked routine enough. Roach walked up, asked what Hale was doing out there, and looked past him into the SUV like he was already hoping to see something. Hale gave him a limited answer. He said he was working in connection with a federal matter and that Roach needed to verify through proper channels. Roach asked for identification. Hale handed over his driver's license and federal credentials, but he didn't give operational details. That part matters. Undercover agents don't burn a case just because a county deputy gets curious on the roadside. Roach didn't seem to know what to do next. He stared at the credentials, asked who Hale was working with, asked what agency contact could confirm it, then asked why the FBI would be in Claiborne County without telling the sheriff. That was already the wrong question. Federal agents don't need a local sheriff's permission to work a federal investigation. They may coordinate when it makes sense, but they don't hand over sensitive details just because a sheriff wants to feel included. Hale explained that verification had to go through the field office. Roach didn't like that answer, so he called Miller. That call changed everything. Miller arrived about 12 minutes later in a white department SUV with his name printed across the side. He didn't walk up like someone trying to calm the stop down. He walked up like Roach had called him to take control. Roach gave him the short version, and it was already slanted. He said Hale was sitting near the feed mill, refusing to explain himself, showing federal credentials, but not cooperating. He also said there might be equipment in the SUV connected to whatever Hale was doing. Miller went straight to the window. He asked Hale for his full name, agency assignment, supervisor, reason for being in the county, and permission to search the SUV. Hale gave him the same answer Roach had received. He had identified himself enough to be verified, but he would not disclose the operation on the roadside, and he did not consent to a search. That was where Miller's tone changed. You could hear it on the body camera. He wasn't confused anymore. He was offended. He told Hale that nobody sat on a county road in Claiborne, refused to answer questions, and hid behind federal credentials. Hale didn't take the bait. He told Miller to contact the FBI field office. Miller asked what was in the vehicle. Hale said he wasn't discussing the contents. Miller asked if there were recording devices. Hale said he wouldn't answer operational questions. Miller asked if Hale was investigating someone in his county. Hale said again that any verification needed to go through federal channels. That was the whole stop in one pattern. Miller kept trying to turn a verification issue into a control issue. Hale kept refusing to give him more than he was entitled to receive. And Miller was not used to that. By then, another deputy had arrived. Lena Price. She was younger, quieter, and not part of Miller's inner circle. Her body camera would later become important because it captured the scene from farther back. Price didn't say much at first, but she watched. She saw Hale's hands. She saw the credentials. She saw that he wasn't trying to flee, wasn't making threats, wasn't reaching around the cabin, and wasn't acting like a criminal suspect. She also saw Miller getting angrier because the stop wasn't bending his way. Miller ordered Hale to step out of the SUV. Hale asked if he was being detained. Miller said he was. Hale asked for the legal basis. Miller said he was interfering with the sheriff's investigation. That answer made no sense. Hale was sitting in a parked vehicle before Roach ever arrived. The only investigation on that roadside was the one Miller had created after the fact. Hale stepped out anyway. He knew exactly what was happening. The roadside wasn't the courtroom. It wasn't internal affairs. It wasn't the federal complaint process. Arguing too hard right there would only give Miller more footage to twist later. So Hale moved slowly, kept his hands open, and stated clearly that detaining him would interfere with an active federal investigation. Miller told Roach to cuff him. Roach hesitated for half a second. Not long, but enough for the camera to catch it. Then He pulled out the handcuffs and locked them around Hale's wrists. No one at that scene understood the size of what had just happened. Not yet. But within the hour, that arrest would reach the FBI office in Atlanta. By the next morning, the Department of Justice would be asking for every second of body camera footage. And by the end of the month, Sheriff Miller's department would no longer be treated like a local agency with a few bad complaints. It would be treated like a civil rights problem with badges. What Miller didn't understand in that moment was that arresting Hale wasn't just a bad decision on a roadside. It changed the category of the whole situation. Before the cuffs went on, this could still be explained as a deputy overreacting, a sheriff getting territorial, maybe even a messy misunderstanding between local and federal law enforcement. Still bad, but survivable. After the cuffs went on, and especially after Hale's SUV was opened, the county had a federal obstruction problem. That's the part Miller missed. He was thinking like a local sheriff who had spent years being the final word in every room. If a driver questioned him, he pushed harder. If a deputy hesitated, he barked an order. If someone filed a complaint, his office controlled the paperwork. That system had worked for him for a long time, but it only worked because the people challenging him were usually ordinary citizens. People with jobs, families, bills, and no realistic way to fight a sheriff's office for months or years. Marcus Hale wasn't in that position. He had a field office behind him. He had check-in protocols. He had tracking. He had supervisors who knew exactly where he was supposed to be and when he was supposed to report. So when Hale missed his scheduled check-in, the issue didn't sit in some local complaint folder. It moved. Fast. At first, Miller still acted like he was handling a normal arrest. Hale was placed in the back of Deputy Roach's cruiser, and Miller ordered the deputies to secure the SUV. That phrase sounded official enough, but the body camera footage later showed what it really meant. They opened the door, looked through the cabin, and handled material they had already been warned not to touch. Deputy Lena Price noticed the problem almost immediately. She didn't make a speech. She didn't challenge Miller in front of everyone. But her body camera caught her telling Roach that they should verify with the FBI before going any further. Miller shut that down. That moment mattered later because it showed the department had a chance to slow down. Someone on scene recognized the risk. The sheriff ignored it. That's the kind of detail investigators love, because it separates an honest mistake from a choice. And Miller kept making choices. He had Hale transported to the Claiborne County Sheriff's Office instead of waiting for federal verification at the scene. He directed deputies to log Hale's property. He pushed for obstruction charges, even though the only thing Hale had really obstructed was Miller's curiosity. By the time Hale entered the station in handcuffs, the case had already outgrown Miller. Then the FBI arrived. Special Agent Dana Brooks didn't come in yelling. She didn't need to. She walked into the lobby with two agents behind her, identified herself, and asked where Marcus Hale was being held. That was when the front desk went quiet, because everybody in that building understood something Miller still didn't want to accept. This wasn't a local arrest anymore. This was now a federal incident, recorded from multiple angles, involving a sheriff who had ignored warnings, detained an undercover agent, and allowed deputies to touch federal material connected to an active investigation. From there, the pressure moved from the lobby to the paperwork. Brooks requested preservation of every body camera file, dispatch recording, booking video, radio transmission, report draft, and text message connected to the stop. Miller tried to say the department would review the matter internally. That was almost funny. Not because the situation was funny, but because Miller still thought internal review meant something when the FBI and DOJ were already involved. Brooks made it clear the evidence was to be preserved immediately. No edits, no missing clips, no overwritten files, no camera malfunction story 2 days later. And that's when Miller's old system started failing him, because the whole department had been built around local control. Control the stop, control the report, control the complaint, control the outcome. But federal investigators weren't asking for Miller's version. They were taking the records. The old complaints were what changed everything. Hale's arrest was the headline, but the federal investigators quickly understood it was only the cleanest example of a much larger problem. Cleanest because it had video. Cleanest because the victim was a federal agent. Cleanest because Miller had ignored warnings in front of his own deputies. But the pattern had been there for years. Once the DOJ started pulling records, the sheriff's office couldn't hide behind vague internal summaries anymore. They had to produce the actual files, stop reports, search logs, complaint forms, body camera audit trails, use of force reviews, emails between supervisors, text messages from command staff, and the picture was ugly. Drivers had complained about being stopped without clear reasons. Families had complained about deputies entering homes without proper consent. Business owners had complained about cash being seized during traffic stops and never returned. Several black residents had filed complaints that sounded almost identical. Deputies claimed they smelled something, searched the car, found nothing, then wrote the report like the person had caused the problem. That kind of repetition matters. One complaint can be dismissed, two can be debated. Dozens with matching language across different years and different deputies start looking like a system. The DOJ also found something else. A lot of the complaints had been reviewed by the same small circle of supervisors. Miller's people. The findings were nearly always the same. No policy violation, no misconduct, no further action. Even when body camera footage contradicted the written report, the office had still cleared the deputy. That put the county in a terrible position. Because now this wasn't just about whether Miller had overreacted to an undercover FBI agent. It was about whether Claiborne County had allowed a sheriff's office to operate for years with almost no real oversight. And that's exactly where the investigation went. Deputy Lena Price became one of the first internal witnesses to cooperate. She didn't pretend she had fought the system for years. She was honest about that. She had stayed quiet too many times. She had told herself that one deputy couldn't change the office. She had worried about retaliation, bad shifts, stalled promotions, and being labeled disloyal. That honesty made her useful. She explained how the department really worked. She told investigators which supervisors edited reports before they were finalized. She explained which complaints were treated seriously and which ones were buried from the start. She described the pressure deputies felt to back Miller publicly, even when they knew he had gone too far. Once Price talked, others followed. Not everyone. Some deputies stayed loyal to Miller until the end. Some acted like they had seen nothing, heard nothing, remembered nothing. But a few decided they weren't going down for a sheriff who had spent years making every decision about himself. Federal investigators compared their statements with the footage, logs, and old complaints. The stories lined up. That was when the county stopped defending Miller. County Attorney Elise Morton advised the commissioners that continuing to back the sheriff could expose the county to even more liability. She wasn't interested in speeches. She was looking at numbers, federal findings, and the kind of consent decree that could strip the county of control over its own department. The financial fallout came fast. The county agreed to a multi-million-dollar federal settlement tied to Hale's unlawful detention, the handling of federal material, and broader civil rights violations uncovered during the investigation. On top of that, several private lawsuits were reopened or newly filed by residents who had complained for years and finally had federal findings to support them. The fines and settlement costs hit hard. Claiborne had planned road repairs, a school resource expansion, and upgrades to the county emergency system. Suddenly, all of that was under review because the sheriff's office had created a financial disaster. People who had ignored complaints for years were now angry for a different reason. The misconduct had become expensive. That's usually when institutions start caring. Then came the consent decree. A federal judge approved oversight terms that changed how the Claiborne County Sheriff's Office operated. Miller no longer had the final say over internal affairs. An outside monitor would review stops, searches, arrests, complaint investigations, and body camera compliance. Deputies had to document legal grounds for searches in detail. Supervisors had to review footage, not just reports. The old way was over. No more clearing a deputy because the paperwork sounded clean. No more missing body camera files without consequences. No more treating complaints like trash unless the person complaining had power. The criminal side moved too. Roach was fired first. He was later charged with obstruction and false reporting connected to the arrest and search of Hale's SUV. Prosecutors argued that he knew Hale had identified himself and still helped create a report that made the detention sound justified. 2 supervisors resigned after investigators found they had approved false or incomplete reports in earlier cases. A lieutenant who oversaw internal affairs was terminated after federal auditors found complaint files had been altered or closed without required interviews. Then Miller's turn came. He resigned before the county could force the issue, but it didn't save him. A federal grand jury indicted him on charges tied to obstruction, deprivation of rights under color of law, and making false statements during the investigation. That last one mattered. A lot of officials survived the original misconduct and get caught lying afterward. Miller had tried to frame the stop as a lawful detention of an evasive subject. The footage showed something else. The dispatch logs showed something else. Price's body camera showed something else. He had built his defense on a version of events the evidence wouldn't support, and the public saw it. When the body camera footage was finally released, the reaction was immediate. Not because people had never seen an unlawful stop before. They had. But this one showed the whole power structure in a simple way. A sheriff was told to verify. He refused. A federal agent warned him. He ignored it. A deputy hesitated. The sheriff pushed forward. A department that had controlled complaints for years suddenly had no control over the evidence. Residents of Claiborne County started showing up at commission meetings with their own stories. Some brought old complaint letters. Some brought court records. Some brought phone videos that had never gone anywhere before. The Hale case gave people a reason to believe someone might finally listen. That was probably the biggest shift. Not the headlines, not the fines. The belief that the sheriff's office could actually be challenged. Over the next year, Claiborne County's department changed almost completely. More than a dozen employees were fired, resigned, or retired early. The county brought in an interim sheriff from outside the region. Deputies went through new training on federal coordination, search law, traffic stop documentation, and duty to intervene. A civilian review board was created with access to complaint outcomes. Stop data had to be published every quarter. Was it perfect? No. Departments don't become trustworthy overnight because a judge signs an order. Culture takes longer than policy. Some residents still didn't trust the new leadership, and honestly, they had every reason to be cautious. But the difference was that the office no longer got to grade its own homework in secret, and that mattered. Marcus Hale returned to federal work after the case, though not immediately. The arrest had compromised part of the investigation, but it also exposed something federal agents had been struggling to prove. Claiborne County's sheriff's office wasn't just sloppy. It was protecting itself at the expense of people's rights. Hale never became loud about it publicly. He didn't need to. His calm on the roadside had done enough. His restraint gave investigators clean evidence. His refusal to reveal sensitive details protected the case. His insistence on procedure showed exactly who was following the rules and who wasn't. Price stayed with the department under the new administration. Some people called her brave. Others said she should have spoken up sooner. Both things could be true. That's how real accountability usually looks. Messy, late, still necessary. As for Miller, the man who once acted like Claiborne County was his personal territory, ended up fighting his case in federal court, answering to a system he couldn't intimidate. That was the lesson. Power feels permanent when nobody checks it. But once the records come out, once the footage is preserved, once people inside the system start telling the truth, the whole image can collapse fast. And in this case, it started with one sheriff thinking a badge gave him the final word. It didn't. So, what would you have done if you were Deputy Price watching that stop go wrong in real time? Would you have spoken up on the roadside or waited until federal investigators arrived? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories about power, accountability, and people finally being forced to answer for what they did, subscribe before you leave.
Oh, ma'am, step away from the vehicle now. Keep your hands where I can see them.
My identification is in the front seat, and courthouse staff can verify me immediately.
That robe does not prove anything. Anybody can buy a costume like that.
Not prove anything. Anybody can buy a costume like
Then
that.
verify it. Call the courthouse. Call.
What happens when a deputy gets so locked into his own authority that he stops doing the one thing his job requires first? Verify. A routine stop at a gas station turned into a public detention when a deputy decided a woman in judicial robes had to be faking it. What he didn't realize was that the woman he tried to embarrass at the pump was a federal judge, and the camera on his chest was recording every bad decision in order. Before this gets deeper, drop where you're watching from in the comments. And if you follow stories about power, rights, and people who know exactly when authority crosses the line, hit like and subscribe. This one only gets worse for the deputy from here. The woman at the center of it was Judge Lena Whitaker, a federal district judge in her early 50s. Calm voice, controlled posture, the kind of person who didn't waste words because she didn't need to. At that moment, she stood beside her sedan at Pump 6, still wearing her judicial robe over a dark dress because she was on her way from a courthouse event to a community legal forum across town. She had stopped for fuel because the tank was low. Normal errand. Bad timing. Deputy Cole Branson had pulled into the station a minute earlier after a caller reported a suspicious woman dressed like a judge near the pumps. That call should have led to one simple thing. A quick check. Name, identification. Maybe a call to dispatch. Maybe a supervisor if needed. Done. Instead, Branson treated the whole thing like he'd already cracked a fraud case. By the time the body camera footage started getting passed around later, the key detail wasn't confusion. It was refusal. He had multiple chances to confirm who she was, and he rejected everyone. At the pump, Branson started pressing her hard. He demanded identification and told her the robe looked like a costume. He said people impersonated officials all the time. He made it sound like her standing there in plain view, fueling her own car in early evening traffic, was some kind of criminal performance. Judge Whitaker stayed measured. She gave her full name. She identified the federal court she served on. She told him her courthouse chambers could confirm her identity within minutes. She told him court security could verify her. She even pointed out that her identification was inside her bag in the front seat. That should have ended it. It didn't. Branson had already moved past checking facts. He was defending the first bad assumption he made. That's where officers get into trouble. The moment they stop investigating and start protecting their ego, the stop changes shape. It stops being about safety or procedure. It becomes personal. The station itself was busy enough for witnesses, but not crowded enough for noise to hide what was happening. A cashier inside the convenience store, Maya Ruiz, kept glancing out through the glass because the deputy's tone didn't match the setting. A delivery driver named Tyrone Bell had pulled up to the next island and slowed down his own routine when he realized this wasn't a normal police contact. Two women by the air pump turned to watch. Everyone could feel the same thing. The deputy was escalating faster than the facts justified. Judge Whitaker didn't feed that energy. She didn't posture. Didn't pull rank in the dramatic way people imagine. She just kept handing him exits. Verify with dispatch. Verify with the courthouse. Verify with federal security. Look at the credentials in the car. Any competent officer would have taken one of those off-ramps. Branson didn't. He kept insisting the robes proved nothing. He said anyone could buy one. He said real judges didn't stop for gas dressed like that. It was one of those statements that sounds dumb the second it leaves someone's mouth, but he was too deep in it to hear himself. And now witnesses were listening. That mattered. Because once a deputy says something that irrational on Bodycam, the whole stop starts reading differently and not cautious, not careful, reckless. He wasn't struggling to understand the situation. He was refusing to accept an answer that would end his authority over it. To understand how it got there, it helps to back up about 40 minutes. Judge Whitaker had spent most of that afternoon at a federal courthouse outreach event tied to a naturalization ceremony and a student legal education program. That was why she still had the robe on. The schedule had run late. She had planned to stop only long enough to fill the tank and head to the next appearance, where she was expected to speak briefly about public trust in institutions. That detail would get ugly later, because while she was on the way to speak about trust in the system, a deputy was busy damaging it in public. She had served on the bench long enough to know exactly how police authority was supposed to work. She also knew something else. The law looks neat in a courtroom and messy in parking lots. In the real world, a bad stop can spin out because one officer decides being questioned feels like being challenged. Branson was the type who confused confidence with judgment. Mid-30s, a few years in uniform, too comfortable issuing commands. He had learned how to sound certain before he learned when certainty should stop. The 911 call fed that weakness. The caller had reported someone looking suspicious in official-looking clothing. Vague, thin, the kind of thing that requires caution, not theater. When he arrived at the station and saw Whitaker in a black robe, he locked onto the visual and ignored the context. Nice car, calm behavior, public setting, no attempt to flee, no signs of fraud, no effort to approach anyone claiming authority. She was pumping gas. That was it. But once he told himself he had caught someone pretending to be a judge, every fact that contradicted him became, in his mind, part of the act. So he came in hot. He asked what court she supposedly worked for. She answered. He asked for ID. She told him where it was. He asked why she was dressed that way. She explained the event she had just left. He dismissed that, too. Then he made the mistake that would haunt him later. He stopped checking her answers and started mocking them. Not loudly at first, just enough. A little edge in the voice. A little disbelief. Enough for everyone nearby to hear that he had already decided she was lying. Judge Whitaker recognized the pattern almost immediately. A routine encounter was turning into a power test. She knew better than to match his tone. She kept hers steady and specific. Name, court, verification options. She made it easy for him. He made it hard on himself. By the time Tyrone Bell lifted his phone and started recording from the next pump, Branson had shifted from suspicious to aggressive. He told her to step away from the car. She did. He told her to keep her hands visible. She did. He told her he was detaining her while he sorted this out. That was the point where the stop crossed from embarrassing to serious. Not because he was still confused, because he had chosen detention before verification. And standing under the gas station lights, with a federal judge in front of him and multiple witnesses watching, Deputy Cole Branson kept digging. Deputy Branson had already made the worst kind of mistake by that point. He didn't just suspect something. He committed to suspicion before doing the easy work. And once an officer does that in public, every next move gets more dangerous, because now pride is involved. At the gas station, Judge Whitaker stood a few feet from her car, with her hands visible, while Branson talked at her like he was exposing a scam. He kept circling the same bad point. The robe meant nothing. Anybody could buy one. Anybody could claim a title. That part was true in the most useless way possible. Anybody can claim anything. That's why officers verify. That's the whole job. He acted like the possibility of deception somehow excused him from checking. She kept giving him the same answer in different forms because that was the cleanest way to box in the facts. She identified the federal district she served in. She told him where her courthouse was. She told him her chamber staff could confirm her within minutes. She told him Federal Protective Service officers would know exactly who she was. Her tone stayed level. No panic, no speeches, just facts. Branson answered facts with commands. He told her not to reach into the vehicle. Fine. She didn't. He told her to stay where she was. Fine. She did. Then he started asking the kind of questions that made the whole scene look worse, not better. Why was she still in the robe? Why would a real judge be at a gas station? Why didn't she have a driver? Why should he believe any of this? It was sloppy. He was no longer investigating a reported concern. He was trying to make ordinary details sound suspicious because he needed the stop to justify itself. The people around them could see it. Maya Ruiz, the cashier inside, later said the judge looked annoyed but controlled, while the deputy looked like a man trying to win an argument he had already lost. Tyrone Bell kept recording from his truck. His video would matter because it caught the wider scene, the deputies pacing, the witnesses looking at each other, the judge staying planted and not giving him anything he could twist into resistance. That's what made the footage bad for him. Not drama, control. She wasn't escalating. He was. Then came the line that flipped the stop from bad judgment into something much harder to defend. Whitaker told him calmly that a real officer verifies identity before accusing someone of impersonation. It wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical. But it landed. You could hear the shift right there in the body cam audio. Branson didn't take it as information. He took it as disrespect. He shot back that the robe was a fake costume until he said otherwise. That line was poison for him later, because now he'd said out loud what he was actually doing. He had replaced procedure with personal authority. He wasn't saying he needed to verify. He was saying his belief came first, and reality had to wait behind it. That's how lawsuits get built, one sentence at a time. Whitaker didn't raise her voice. She told him again to call the courthouse. She told him again to call federal court security. She even gave him a name to ask for. That should have been the easiest moment in the world for him to recover. Make the call, get the answer, end the stop. Instead, he doubled down again and told her she was being detained for investigation of impersonation and failure to comply. Failure to comply with what, exactly? That was the problem. She had complied with every physical instruction. She stepped away from the car, kept her hands visible, stayed put. What he meant was that she wasn't surrendering the basic truth of who she was, just because he found it inconvenient. Branson moved her towards the front quarter panel of his patrol unit and positioned her there while he talked into his radio. Even then, he still didn't use the radio the right way. Instead of verifying her identity cleanly, he framed the call around a suspicious woman dressed as a judge claiming federal status. That wording mattered. It contaminated the stop. He was feeding dispatch his conclusion instead of asking for facts. That's another thing bad officers do when they start slipping. They narrate themselves into being right. Whitaker caught that too. She told him he was misstating the situation and that the station cameras, witness phones, and his body camera were preserving all of it. That was the first moment his posture changed a little. Not much. Not just enough to notice. He finally realized this wasn't disappearing into paperwork. There would be a record. Still, he kept going. He asked whether she expected him to believe that a federal judge was standing at a pump alone in full robe. The answer was obvious. Yes. Because that was exactly what was happening. Life doesn't stop being real just because it looks unusual for 30 seconds. Judges stop for gas. Doctors buy groceries and scrubs. Firefighters pick up food in uniform. Adults understand context. Branson was acting like context was optional. A second deputy arrived and slowed near the pumps. For a moment, it looked like the scene might calm down. Sometimes a second officer resets the first one, gives him a way to climb down without admitting he messed up. But Branson got to him first. He gave a quick version that leaned hard into the idea that she was probably impersonating a judge and being evasive about proving otherwise. That wasn't true, and it was all on camera. Whitaker corrected the record immediately. She said she had repeatedly offered multiple verification routes and that Deputy Branson had refused to use them. Tight, specific, clean. She was building the timeline in real time because she knew exactly where this could end up. The second deputy didn't jump in much. That told its own story. He looked uncertain. He looked like a man realizing he had stepped into somebody else's bad stop. Smart officers feel that early. They start watching their own exposure. By then, a few more people had phones out. Nothing wild. Nobody yelling. That actually made it worse for Branson. There was no chaos to hide behind. No crowd pressure. No fast-moving threat. Just a deputy making one bad decision after another in a bright, ordinary place. Then, the supervisor call finally happened. Sergeant Denise Harper arrived without rushing the scene, and that alone changed the temperature. Experienced supervisors don't need theatrics, they look first. She stepped out, took in the robe, the patrol position, the witness phones, the judge's posture, Branson's face. It didn't take her long to figure out this had gone sideways. Branson started explaining right away. Too fast. Too defensive. He said the woman was claiming to be a federal judge, refused to provide proper proof, and was detained pending investigation. Harper asked the question he should have been asked earlier. Had he called the courthouse? Branson said not yet. Had he contacted federal court security? No. Had he checked for judicial ID in the vehicle after receiving a safe path to retrieve it? No. That was it. The stop was basically dead right there. Because once the supervisor had to ask whether the obvious verification steps had been taken, and the answer was no 3 times in a row, the logic of the detention started collapsing in public. Harper turned to Judge Whitaker and asked for her full name. Whitaker gave it. Asked which court? Whitaker answered. Asked whether there was a direct chambers line or court security contact. Whitaker provided both from memory. Harper made 2 calls. That was all it took. 2 calls. The first confirmed that Judge Lena Whitaker was, in fact, a sitting federal district judge and had attended an official event that afternoon in robe. The second confirmed court security knew exactly where she had been headed next and had already expected her at the community forum. Minutes. That's all it took. Minutes Branson could have used at the start. The moment that confirmation came back, everybody at the station could feel it. Witnesses. The second deputy. Harper. Even Branson. The case he had invented was over. What remained was the record of how long he had refused to end it. Harper's face tightened. Not dramatic. Just done. She told Branson to release the detention immediately and step back. Judge Whitaker adjusted her robe, looked directly at the 2 deputies, then at Harper, and kept her comments short. She said authority without discipline was just ego with a badge. That line stuck because it was true. And for Deputy Cole Branson, the public detention was over. The real damage was just starting. Once Sergeant Harper confirmed the judge's identity, the stop itself was finished. The damage wasn't. Deputy Branson had detained a sitting federal judge in public, at a gas station, while refusing the easiest verification steps available to him. That's the part that ruined him. Not a split-second safety call. Not confusion that got corrected fast. A slow, stubborn refusal to check before accusing, on camera in front of witnesses. Judge Whitaker didn't turn it into a scene after the release. She didn't need to. She gave Harper a short statement right there, asked for every name and badge number involved, and made it clear she wanted the body camera footage preserved immediately. Smart move. Because once agencies realize litigation is possible, records suddenly become very important. She also asked that the gas station video be secured before it got overwritten. Again, Smart. She was thinking 3 steps ahead while Branson was still trying to recover from the fact that 2 phone calls had ended the whole thing. The witnesses mattered too. Tyrone Bell gave his contact information before leaving. So did Maya Ruiz. A couple of other customers did the same. That turned this from a deputy's word against a judge's word into a documented incident with multiple angles. Bodycam, security footage, civilian recordings, dispatch logs, supervisor response. Once all of that exists, the story gets harder to bury and much easier to reconstruct. Branson tried to defend himself in the first internal report. Officers like that almost always do. He framed the stop as a good faith investigation into possible impersonation. He described the robes as suspicious. He suggested the detention was temporary and reasonable. That might have worked if the footage matched the paperwork. It didn't. The recordings showed the judge repeatedly offering clean verification routes and a deputy refusing them. That gap between report and video is where careers usually start collapsing. Within days, the sheriff's office placed him on administrative leave pending internal review. Publicly, the department used the usual language: active investigation, serious concerns, commitment to professionalism, standard stuff. But inside the building, people already knew the real problem. He had no procedural excuse. He wasn't overloaded. He wasn't under attack. He just acted like checking facts was optional because he liked his own assumption better. That review didn't stay local for long because this was a federal judge. Once the court was notified, the incident moved past ordinary embarrassment. The chief judge of the district raised formal concerns. Federal court administration wanted preservation orders on all footage and dispatch records. Court security personnel documented the timeline. Lawyers got involved fast. No surprise there. A local deputy publicly detaining a federal judge while calling judicial robes a fake costume is the kind of thing that gets attention from people who usually don't waste time on noise, and the footage was bad, really bad. Not dramatic in the movie sense, worse than that. It was methodically stupid. That's what made it dangerous for him. You could watch the stop and count the chances he had to fix it. Call the courthouse, check the credentials, let a supervisor verify sooner. Listen to the subject. Use dispatch correctly. He missed every one. Then he made it worse by speaking like his personal disbelief was evidence. That became the center of the legal fight. Whitaker didn't file a lawsuit because her feelings were hurt. That's the part people miss in stories like this. The issue wasn't that someone doubted her for a minute. The issue was unlawful detention after available verification was refused. Public humiliation made it uglier. The bodycam made it provable. The law made it actionable. Her attorneys focused on a few points that were hard to answer. No meaningful basis to move from inquiry to detention without first using obvious verification methods. Mischaracterization of her conduct as non-compliant when she had followed physical commands and offered identification routes. Escalation based on personal suspicion instead of objective investigation. Failure to properly communicate the facts to dispatch. Then the supervisory issue. Why the stop got that far before someone senior stepped in and did what should have been done at the start? The sheriff's office had exposure too, not just Branson. Because once a deputy behaves like that in public, the next question is training. Was he taught badly, supervised badly, or tolerated too long? Those are expensive questions for a department. If his file showed prior attitude problems, complaints, or escalation issues, the county had a bigger problem than one bad gas station stop. Then it turns into pattern and notice. Departments hate those words. Juries don't. The public reaction followed the footage. Local news ran with it first. Then legal commentary channels picked it up. Then bigger outlets. The clip that spread fastest wasn't the release. It was the deputy saying the robes were a costume until he decided otherwise. That sentence became the whole case in miniature. He had said the quiet part out loud. He had put himself above verification. That kind of clip stays alive because people instantly understand it. You don't need legal training to see the failure. A person identified herself, offered ways to confirm it. The officer refused, then detained her anyway. Everybody gets that. The department eventually announced discipline. First leave, then termination proceedings. After that came the state certification review, because getting fired is one thing and losing the ability to work law enforcement again is another. That part hit harder. A lot harder. Branson had built his authority around the badge. Once that badge became a liability, there wasn't much left to hide behind. The county also had to make changes because, after something this public, doing nothing looks like approval. Verification procedures got tightened. Supervisory notification thresholds changed for public official impersonation claims. Dispatch language rules were reviewed, so deputies couldn't load radio traffic with conclusions instead of facts. Refresher training went out on detention standards, identification checks, and body camera report consistency. In plain English, the department had to write down rules for behavior that should have already been obvious. Judge Whitaker went back to work. That part matters. She didn't become a public crusader overnight. She didn't need a dramatic reinvention. She returned to the bench, continued her duties, and let the documentation do the talking. But the incident followed her in one important way. It made her more direct in later public remarks about institutional trust. She had lived the exact problem people often talk around. Not lawlessness, not confusion, ego. Small, unchecked ego wearing public authority. That was the lesson. Not every rights violation starts with rage. Sometimes it starts with a deputy who decides his first guess matters more than the verification sitting right in front of him. Then the whole encounter becomes a contest he has to win. That's when ordinary stops turn into lawsuits. That's when body cameras stop protecting officers and start exposing them. And that's when the person staying calm usually ends up being the one with the real power in the long run. So that was the real collapse at the gas station. Not just recognition failure, discipline failure, judgment failure, procedural failure. One deputy thought the robe was the issue. It wasn't. The issue was that he saw multiple ways to learn the truth and treated all of them like threats to his authority. What would you have done in that situation? And have you ever seen somebody with a badge turn a simple check into a full-blown ego contest? Drop it in the comments. Share this story with somebody who still thinks accountability only matters when things get physical. And subscribe if you want more stories like this, because a lot of these cases don't start with violence. They start with somebody deciding they don't need to verify before they control.
I'm asking again, what are you doing here?
Parked in a public lot. Is there a problem?
There have been complaints about suspicious vehicles.
About mine specifically?
I'm conducting an investigation.
That didn't answer the question.
Where do you work?
Why does that matter if you don't have a lawful basis to stop me?
What happens when a deputy tries to force control over someone who already knows he's crossing the line? This one started in a public parking lot, with a county deputy standing at the window of a black SUV, demanding identification from a black woman who was doing nothing illegal. She stayed in the driver's seat. He kept pressing. She kept asking the same thing back through the half-open window. What exactly was the legal reason for this stop? He didn't answer it straight. He couldn't. That's where the story really began. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And if you follow stories about police overreach, recordings, and people who know how to hold the line, hit like and subscribe. A lot of these situations only change once somebody refuses to be bullied. The woman in the SUV was Federal Judge Amara Vale. Deputy Nolan Rusk didn't know that yet. It was late afternoon in Belmere County, outside a professional plaza with a dental office, a tax firm, a physical therapy clinic, and a coffee shop on the corner. Normal place, open lot, cars coming and going, people still around, nothing locked down, nothing restricted. Judge Vale had parked there for a few minutes after leaving court, because she had another event later and wanted time to review notes before heading across town. She wasn't asleep. She wasn't slumped over. She wasn't bothering anyone. She was sitting in her vehicle with a tablet in her lap. Rusk pulled into the lot, slowed near her SUV, then parked behind it at an angle. Not a full block in, but enough to make the point. He got out and went straight to her window. He asked what she was doing there. She told him she was parked in a public lot and asked if there was a problem. He said there had been reports of suspicious vehicles in the area. That was the first week move. Not a crime, not a traffic issue, not a complaint tied to her specifically, just suspicious vehicles. The kind of phrase officers use when they want room to improvise. Judge Vale didn't start explaining herself. She asked whether she was being detained. He ignored that and asked for identification. She asked again whether she was being detained. He said he was conducting an investigation. That answer did two things at once. It avoided the real issue, and it let him act like he had legal footing without actually naming any. She knew what he was doing. She'd seen this pattern before from the bench. Vague language first, pressure second, then escalation if the person didn't fold. She kept her hands visible and her voice level. No attitude, no panic. She asked what crime he suspected. He told her she was making a simple contact harder than it needed to be. That was another tell. He wasn't talking about law anymore. He was talking about compliance. He wanted the stop to work because she made it easy for him, not because he had a valid reason. She asked if she was free to leave. He still didn't answer clearly. He said he needed to confirm who she was. That made it worse. In his mind, her identity was becoming the reason for the stop. That's backward. He needed lawful grounds before forcing identification, not the other way around. A few people nearby had already started watching. Nothing dramatic. They just noticed the deputy's tone. One employee walking out of the tax office slowed down near the sidewalk. A delivery driver loading boxes into a van kept looking over. A man near the coffee shop entrance stopped and stayed put. Rusk asked where she worked. That question said more than he probably realized. He wasn't asking about a specific offense. He was trying to figure out whether she belonged there. Same thing with a different costume on it. Judge Vale didn't play along. She told him again he needed to state a legal basis for detaining her. He asked where she was headed next. Same problem. No legal basis. Just fishing. She repeated that being seated in a legally parked car in a public lot was not a crime. He stepped back from the window and called in her plate. That was him looking for something to save the stop. Maybe expired registration. Maybe a warrant. Maybe anything that could give him a better reason after the fact. Officers do that when they start with instinct and hope the computer helps them later. Nothing helpful came back right away. At that point, a careful officer backs out. He didn't. He changed the reason. Now he mentioned trespass complaints in the plaza. That didn't hold either. The lot was open. Businesses were still operating. No owner was present. No one had approached her. No one had asked her to leave. She pointed that out immediately. Then he switched again. He said he was checking on her welfare. That one didn't fit his own behavior. Welfare checks don't usually open with a demand for ID and a confrontational tone. They definitely don't come after a trespass theory fails. By then, one of the people watching had his phone out and was recording. Rusk saw it. His shoulders tightened. He looked around once, then went back to the window. Some officers get more careful when they know they're being recorded. Others get more stubborn because now they feel exposed. He went with stubborn. He told Judge Vale to step out of the vehicle. She asked on what legal basis. He called it a lawful order. She asked if she was being detained. He finally said yes. That mattered. Up to that point, he had stayed slippery. Now he was committing himself. If this got reviewed later, he couldn't hide behind casual contact anymore. He had just made it a detention. She asked what specific facts supported it. He gave her a pile of weak answers. Suspicious vehicle. Refusal to identify. Complaints in the area. None of that cleaned it up. It just showed he was stacking excuses because the first one never held. She stayed seated, still calm, still focused. She didn't start arguing in circles. She kept bringing him back to the same issue. What lawful reason did he actually have? He didn't like that. A lot of officers are comfortable when they control the pace. Question, answer, command, movement. She broke that rhythm. Every time he tried to push past the legal gap, she brought him back to it. Then he made the next move people always make when they feel their authority slipping. He called for backup. That changed the temperature right away. Another unit meant this was no longer one deputy making a bad stop. It was about to become a scene. More uniforms, more pressure, more chances for somebody to turn a weak detention into a bigger mess just because they didn't want to admit the first move was bad. Judge Amara Vale was still sitting in her vehicle, calm, not rambling, not helping him build a case against her, just holding the line and making him say out loud what he clearly did not have. Deputy Nolan Rusk still had no idea who she was, and the backup unit was already pulling into the lot. The second patrol unit rolled into the lot before Nolan Rusk had figured out how to fix the stop he had already messed up. Deputy Marisol Quaid stepped out and read the scene fast. Black SUV in a marked space. Driver still inside. Rusk tight at the window. Already too invested. One man on a phone recording. 2 more people watching from the walkway. That was enough. Good officers can usually tell when a routine contact has gone sideways before anyone finishes explaining it. Rusk tried to frame it for her right away. He said he was working a suspicious vehicle call. He said the driver had refused to identify herself. He said he had detained her because she was being uncooperative. That version sounded clean for about 3 seconds. Then Quaid moved closer and got the other side. The woman inside the SUV, still calm, still seated, laid it out in a way that immediately exposed the gap. She had been parked legally in a public lot. Rusk had approached and demanded identification. He had not named a specific offense. When she asked whether she was being detained, he danced around it. When she asked for legal grounds, he switched explanations instead of giving one. That matters a lot. People who are bluffing usually ramble. People who know exactly what's happening keep it simple. Quaid turned back to Rusk and pressed him for the actual basis, not the attitude, not the frustration, the reason. That's where he started slipping. The original call, as he described it, was vague. No clear suspect description, no plate tied to a crime, no business owner waving deputies over, no report that this specific SUV had done anything illegal. He had seen a vehicle, made assumptions, and walked up expecting compliance to do the rest of the work for him. When that didn't happen, he had started stacking labels on top of the stop. Suspicious vehicle, possible trespass, welfare check, refusal to identify, officer safety. Same encounter, different wrapping every 30 seconds. Quaid saw it. So did the people recording. The woman in the SUV kept bringing him back to the same point. She wanted one thing from him, a lawful reason. That was it. He kept trying to move the encounter forward without ever locking that down. That works with people who get nervous and start over-explaining themselves. It doesn't work with someone who knows the order matters. Grounds first. Commands second. Rusk was irritated now. Not because she was hard to understand, because she was impossible to push. Big difference. He tried another route. He started talking about the area, the businesses, the complaints they'd had, the need to check people out when something looked off. That kind of language sounds harmless until you listen closely. He still wasn't tying her to an actual act. He was talking about presence, about fit, about whether she seemed like she belonged in that lot. That's when he said too much. He made it clear, in front of Quaid and in front of the civilians recording, that part of his concern was whether she even had a reason to be there. That line changed the whole stop. It stripped the badge language off it. This was not about a crime. It was about him seeing a black woman in a place he had decided required explanation. The woman didn't get emotional. She did something better. She slowed him down and pinned the statement where everyone could hear it. She made him confront what he had just implied. He tried to back off, said she was twisting things. She wasn't. He had walked himself right into the center of the problem. Quaid didn't jump in to rescue him either. That's another thing worth noticing. Backup officers often have a choice in moments like this. They can help bury a bad stop, or they can stop it from getting worse. Quaid chose the second path. She pushed him on the basics. His plate check had not given him anything useful. The SUV was properly registered. No warrant issue. No active bulletin tying that vehicle to a criminal investigation. No owner complaint. No trespass warning. Nothing solid. He had started with a hunch and then tried to build legal authority around it after the fact. That's not policing, that's fishing. Rusk still didn't let go. He ordered the driver out of the vehicle again. This time he tried to hide behind tone and volume. He acted like saying it with more force would make it more lawful. The woman stayed where she was and asked him once again what offense supported the detention. He still couldn't answer cleanly. He reached for obstruction for a moment, then drifted away from it, touched trespass again, then lost it. Mentioned officer safety even though nothing about her conduct supported that. Hands visible. No movement toward the console. No reaching, no threat, no effort to leave. No reason for the performance he was putting on. Then the stop hit the point he should have feared from the beginning. The woman identified herself as Judge Amara Vale of the United States District Court. That landed hard. Not because her title changed the law. It didn't. She had already been right before he knew her name. What changed was the level of damage. The stop had just moved from a bad roadside decision to an event that would almost certainly be reviewed by people who understood exactly how thin his conduct was. Quaid's posture changed right away. She understood the exposure. So did the people with phones up. Rusk did too, although he tried not to show it. He asked for identification again, but he sounded different now. Less command, more retreat. Judge Vale did not let him rewrite the scene. She made it clear the issue was not who she was. The issue was what he had already done. He had detained first, searched for reasons later, and changed those reasons in front of witnesses when each one failed. That was the cleanest summary of the whole mess. Quaid looked at him like she already knew where this was headed. Internal review. Body camera pull. Dispatch audio. Maybe media if any of those recordings got posted. He knew it too. He had just hoped he could muscle the stop into something cleaner before anyone really looked at it. Too late now. He backed off. No apology, no honest explanation. Just a stiff, late statement that she was free to go. Classic move. End the detention and pray the rest dies quietly. Judge Vale didn't leave immediately. Smart. She stayed long enough to lock in the next layer. Names, badge numbers, confirmation that both body cameras had been running. The incident reference. The dispatch call tied to the so-called suspicious vehicle report. She wasn't posturing. She was preserving the record before the story could be cleaned up on paper. Quaid gave her information without a fight. Rusk did the same, but slower. He was already realizing the real problem wasn't that he had stopped the wrong woman. It was that he had treated her the way he probably treated plenty of people who never had the standing, the knowledge, or the leverage to push back this hard. Then Judge Amara Vale drove out of the lot. Rusk stayed there with Quaid and the witnesses, and the phone still pointed his way. And for the first time since he walked up to that SUV, he had no control over what happened next. Judge Amara Vale did not waste time once she left that parking lot. She handled it the way people do when they know the difference between outrage and evidence. First, she wrote down the timeline while it was still fresh. Then she secured what mattered. The deputies' names, the unit numbers, the incident reference, the location, the time, and the names of the civilians who had recorded parts of the stop. By that night, she also had court security aware of the encounter and a formal preservation request moving toward the sheriff's office. That was the first hit. The second came from the phones in the lot. One of the witnesses uploaded a short clip that evening. Not the full encounter, just enough to show the shape of it. A deputy pressing a black woman for ID in a public lot. Her staying calm. Him stumbling when asked for an actual legal basis. Then, the moment the title came out. Federal judge. That clip moved fast because people understood it immediately. Not because she was powerful. Because if an officer felt comfortable doing that to a federal judge in public, then regular people already knew what the rest of that story meant. By the next morning, Belmere County Sheriff's Office had a problem on its hands. At first, they tried the usual soft language. Statement under review, full facts being gathered, commitment to professionalism, that kind of thing, safe words, delay words. Nobody serious was impressed. Too many people had already seen enough. More important, the office knew body camera from 2 deputies existed, dispatch audio existed, and the stop report was going to be checked against all of it. That's where bad stops really collapse. Not on the pavement. On playback. Rusk's report didn't help him. He tried to tighten the story. He made the contact sound cleaner than it was. He leaned on suspicious circumstances, investigative detention, officer safety concerns. But once the footage was pulled, the problem was obvious. The reasons kept changing. The facts never got stronger. He had started with a vague claim, then kept reaching for something firmer as the encounter went on. Internal Affairs opened the review within 48 hours. That part matters too. Departments drag their feet when they think a complaint can be buried. They move faster when they know somebody with standing is going to keep pulling. Judge Vale did exactly that. She did not rant in public. She did not go on television right away. She worked the process and made sure every piece of the process had to move. Quaid got interviewed early. Her statement mattered because she had arrived after the stop began. That made her useful. She was not tied to the original decision. She confirmed what the footage already showed. By the time she got there, Rusk still had no clear, stable basis for detention. He was trying to hold authority together with volume and repetition. Dispatch records made it worse for him. The original call did not describe Judge Vale's SUV as tied to any known offense. No trespass complaint had been made by any business in the plaza. No request for removal had come from a property manager. No active alert matched her vehicle. He had built the stop out of suspicion first and facts second. Then more people started talking. That is always the danger for departments after one of these incidents. Once a name gets loose, other encounters start surfacing. A local defense lawyer said Rusk had a pattern of pushing weak detentions and then leaning on attitude-based justifications. 2 residents filed old complaint numbers with reporters. Neither case had gone anywhere. One involved a stop outside a fitness center. Another involved a man questioned while waiting for his daughter near a tutoring office. Same county, same basic smell to it. Now the sheriff's office had a single bad stop turning into a pattern question. That's when command staff stopped treating it like a public relations issue and started treating it like exposure. The sheriff met with county counsel. County counsel met with risk management. Risk management did the math every office does in private. Video, witnesses, weak legal basis. Public official involved. Clear profiling language caught during the stop. That mix gets expensive fast. Rusk was pulled off patrol before the first week ended. Officially, it was administrative leave pending investigation. In plain language, the office no longer trusted him in public, with a camera pointed at him. Judge Vale did not ask for special treatment. She pushed something more dangerous than that. She pushed consistency. If the stop was unlawful when it happened to her, then the standards for discipline and policy review should reflect every other person it could happen to. That made her harder to dismiss. She wasn't asking the system to protect a judge. She was forcing it to answer for what it tolerated when the person stopped had no title at all. By the second week, the county had outside counsel involved, and the sheriff's office had ordered a policy review on consensual encounters, parking lot detentions, and identification demands absent clear legal cause. That review exposed another ugly truth. Deputies had broad discretion on paper and weak supervision in practice. Training covered the basics, But street culture filled in the gaps, and street culture often teaches the wrong lesson. Push first, explain later. Treat refusal as threat. Treat questions as resistance. That mindset had been living in the office long before Judge Vale parked in that lot. Rusk's interview with investigators went badly. He could not keep the story steady. The same problem from the parking lot followed him into the review room. He kept shifting emphasis. First, it was suspicious vehicle complaints, then officer safety, then non-compliance, then concern about trespass. Every version ran into the same wall. None of it explained why he escalated before he had a real basis. The witness video got released in longer form after that. Then part of the body camera did too. That ended any hope of quiet cleanup. People watched him press and circle and improvise. They watched Judge Vale stay measured. They watched the moment where his concern about who belonged there came through. That line did major damage because it was simple and familiar. A lot of viewers had heard some version of it before. Maybe not in those exact words. Same meaning. The discipline came down before the month was over. Rusk was terminated, not reassigned, not quietly moved. Fired. The findings named unlawful detention, improper escalation, failure to articulate reasonable suspicion, and conduct inconsistent with departmental policy and constitutional standards. The county also referred the case for decertification review, which meant his badge problem was no longer limited to Belmere County. The sheriff's office announced mandatory retraining for patrol deputies. New rules followed. Supervisors had to review more field detention reports. Deputies had to document the factual basis for ID demands with more specificity. Parking lot contacts without clear criminal nexus got extra scrutiny. That didn't fix everything. No serious person would claim that. But it did something real. It made lazy pretext harder to hide. Judge Vale reached a civil settlement with the county months later. The number stayed confidential, but the non-financial terms did not. Policy changes, training revisions, record retention requirements, better supervisory review. The county wanted the case closed. She wanted the structure changed enough that the next person would have a stronger record when an officer tried the same game. That is the part people miss when they tell stories like this too simply. This was never just about one deputy learning the hard way, that the woman in the SUV was a federal judge. It was about a deputy making a stop he thought he could control, because he thought the person in front of him would fold. He guessed wrong. Then the record caught up with him. And that's the lesson. A lot of abuse of authority survives on habit, on speed, on confusion, on the belief that most people won't know where the line is, and even if they do, they won't be able to prove when it got crossed. This time, the person in that seat knew the law, knew the process.
Put your hands on the truck.
Okay.
I just want to know what this stop is for. You don't run this stop.
I do.
I'm not trying to run anything.
I pulled over. I gave you my license. I'm cooperating.
Then stop talking and do what I said.
I'm just trying to understand what this is about.
I told you to stop talking.
Hey, easy, man. Easy. I'm not fighting.
What happens when a Texas officer turns a basic traffic stop into a power contest in front of someone who understands exactly how fast bad policing becomes civil liability? On a dark stretch of frontage road outside Houston, one patrol officer kept escalating when he should have slowed down. He kept pushing when the driver stayed calm. He kept making it personal. What he didn't realize in that moment was that the dash cam, the body cam, and the roadside witnesses were all locking him into a version of events he would never be able to talk his way out of later. Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from, and if you follow stories about police overreach, bad stops, and real accountability, hit like and subscribe. This one matters because the fallout didn't stop at the roadside. The driver was not a criminal. He was not drunk. He was not armed in any illegal way. He was not running. He was not threatening anybody. His name in the story was Darren Pike, 36 years old, a regional logistics supervisor based outside Houston, married, 2 kids, clean record, the kind of man who kept his registration current, his insurance current, and his voice under control even when other people lost theirs. That part matters. Because later, the officer tried to write the scene like Darren had forced everything that happened next. The footage said otherwise. The officer was Travis Harlan, a county patrol deputy with a reputation for getting heated fast. Not the loud clown type. Worse. The kind who acted like every small question from a citizen was a challenge to his authority. Guys like that are dangerous because they don't think they're losing control. They think control means making everybody else feel it. That night started ordinary. Darren had left a late supplier meeting and was driving home in his gray pickup a little after 9 p.m. Traffic was light. Storefronts were half lit. He was moving through one of those commercial strips where speed limits change fast and patrol cars sit waiting for easy stops. Harlan pulled out behind him after Darren came off the feeder road. The official reason for the stop would change later. That's always a bad sign. First, it was speed. Then it was a lane issue. Later, it turned into officer safety language. Same pattern every time somebody's trying to fix a weak stop after the fact. Darren saw the lights, signaled, and pulled into a gas station lot with bright overhead lighting. Smart move. Cameras, witnesses, space. He turned the truck off, rolled the window down, and put both hands where they could be seen. Nothing dramatic. Just a man trying to get through a stop and go home. Harlan walked up already tense. Not alert. Tense. Big difference. He asked for license and insurance. Darren told him he'd reached slowly and did exactly that. Harlan took the documents, looked them over, then asked where Darren was coming from. Darren answered. Then Harlan asked where he was headed. Darren answered that, too. Then came the first shift. Harlan asked why Darren had taken so long to pull over. That wasn't true. The dashcam timestamp later showed Darren signaled quickly and stopped in a well-lit public lot within seconds. Darren explained that he wanted a safe place with lighting. Reasonable answer, smart answer. Harlan didn't take it that way. He took it as Darren explaining himself too well. Again, guys like this don't hear calm as calm. They hear calm as resistance. So he pressed harder. He asked whether Darren had anything in the vehicle he needed to know about. Darren said no contraband, no illegal weapons, no reason for concern. Harlan then asked him to step out. Now, Darren knew something a lot of people don't. An officer can order you out during a lawful traffic stop. Arguing about that on the roadside usually goes nowhere good. So he complied. Slow. Visible hands. No attitude. That should have been the end of the tension curve. Instead, it became the start of the real problem. Once Darren was out of the truck, Harlan changed his whole posture. He got closer. He started stacking commands. Hands here. Face this way. Don't move. Answer the question directly. That tactic is old. Flood somebody with instructions, then act like confusion is defiance. Darren kept trying to stay ahead of it. He said he was complying. He said he didn't want any trouble. He asked what the stop was actually for. That question landed badly, not because it was aggressive. The audio later made that clear. Darren's tone stayed level. No yelling, no cursing, no threats. But Harlan reacted like the question itself crossed a line. That was the moment the stop stopped being about traffic and started being about ego. Harlan told Darren to place his hands on the truck. Darren did. Harlan started a pat-down, harder than it needed to be. Darren turned his head slightly and asked what justified a search. Harlan snapped back that he was in charge and Darren needed to stop talking. That line mattered later because it told the whole story in one shot. Not safety, not investigation, not procedure, control. By then, another unit was coming in. Deputy Maya Lott pulled into the lot as backup. Her arrival should have cooled things down. Sometimes a second officer resets the scene. Sometimes it makes the first officer act even bigger, because now he has an audience. That's what happened here. Harlan started narrating Darren as non-compliant before the facts supported it. He told Maya that Darren was being argumentative. He said Darren was acting suspicious. He said he wasn't following instructions cleanly. The problem was the cameras were still rolling, and Darren had done almost nothing except ask what was happening and keep telling the officer he was cooperating. Darren said again that he was not resisting and asked whether he was being detained or arrested. Harlan didn't answer straight. Another bad sign. Clean stops usually come with clean answers. Then came the move that changed the whole case. Harlan grabbed Darren's arm, tried to force it higher behind his back, and shoved him toward the side of the truck. Fast, unnecessary, pure escalation. Darren instinctively stiffened and said he wasn't resisting. Maya stepped closer but didn't interrupt. Harlan took that moment of body tension and treated it like a threat. That's how bad reports get built in real time. Officer creates pressure, civilian reacts to pressure. Officer calls the reaction aggression. Within seconds, Darren was slammed against the truck and being cuffed. Not after a chase, not after a swing, not after a weapon. After a question. After compliance. After one officer decided he wasn't going to be questioned in public. And the worst part? Harlan still hadn't clearly stated a reason that matched the force he was using. The dash cam kept recording. The body cam kept recording. People at the gas station had started looking over. One man near the ice freezer had his phone out. Another woman standing by pump 6 turned to watch the whole thing. The scene had gone from ordinary stop to public problem. Darren was breathing hard now, trying to keep his voice steady while cuffed against his own truck. Harlan kept talking over him, kept saying, "Stop resisting," kept saying it louder than the facts supported. That phrase shows up a lot when officers know the video is going to matter. And now the case had its first clear fracture. Because once an officer starts performing for the report instead of handling the scene, he's not policing anymore. He's protecting himself. That was where the stop crossed the line. Officer Travis Harlan had already put Darren Pike in cuffs. That should have forced the stop into a clear legal lane. Either there was a real basis for detention, or there wasn't. He still didn't give one. Darren was bent over the side of his truck, wrists pinned too high. He kept saying he was cooperating. He kept asking what he was being detained for. Harlan kept calling him resistant without answering the question. That mattered because the cameras locked the order in place. Darren had complied first. Harlan escalated first. Then Harlan started naming excuses. Deputy Maya Lott had arrived by then. Harlan gave her a fast version of the scene and described Darren as argumentative and suspicious. He made it sound like he had dealt with a dangerous driver. The body cam did not back that up. Darren had asked questions, that was it. Harlan searched Darren's pockets and pulled out his wallet, keys, and phone. Darren said he did not consent to any search. Harlan ignored him. Then Harlan added a new reason for the stop. He said he smelled marijuana coming from the truck. That claim showed up late. Too late. He had not mentioned it at the window. He had not mentioned it when he ordered Darren out. He had not mentioned it during the pat-down. It appeared only after Darren was cuffed and after the stop had already turned ugly. That kind of change destroys officers in court. Harlan then opened the truck and searched the cab. Center console, glove box, work bag, papers, charging cables, receipts. Nothing illegal, nothing dangerous, nothing that justified the force he had already used. Darren kept asking for a supervisor, calmly, more than once. Harlan told him to stop talking. That line hurt him later, too. Darren was not yelling. He was not threatening anybody. He was asking for process. Harlan treated even that like defiance. The search kept going. Harlan found a legal pad with work notes and route times from Darren's meeting schedule. He started treating it like suspicious evidence. He hinted that Darren might have been checking locations. That was weak and everybody there could see it. He was no longer investigating a stop. He was trying to rescue one. People at the gas station had noticed by then. A clerk stood near the entrance with a phone up. Another customer stayed by the pumps and recorded from farther back. Darren was cuffed beside his own truck, while Harlan kept talking bigger than the facts supported. Then Sergeant Eli Mercer arrived. This was the first real chance to stop the damage. Mercer asked Harlan for the reason for the stop. Harlan gave him a polished version. He said Darren delayed pulling over, acted suspicious, resisted commands, and showed signs that justified detention and search. Then Mercer asked Darren what happened. Darren gave a short answer. He said he pulled over in a lit public place, handed over his documents, stepped out when ordered, asked why he was being searched, and got slammed into the truck. No speech, no performance, just the order of events. Mercer then asked Harlan what the original violation was. That was where the stop broke open. Harlan first said speeding, then he said lane movement, then he shifted toward officer safety and possible narcotics indicators. 3 different lanes. Same stop, same few minutes. That looked bad immediately. Mercer asked if dispatch had returned anything. No warrants, no alerts, no violent history, nothing. He asked whether any contraband had been found. Nothing. He asked whether Darren had threatened anyone. No. He asked whether Darren had attempted to flee. No. Now the problem was obvious. Darren was cuffed, searched, and shoved around, but the facts under the stop kept shrinking instead of getting stronger. Mercer looked at Darren's wrists. Red marks. He looked at Darren's shoulder position, tight and stiff. He looked at the truck, half searched and empty. Then he looked at the people recording. At that point, Harlan should have backed off. He still didn't. He repeated that Darren had tensed up and would not follow commands cleanly. That was the phrase he leaned on. Tensed up. Officers use that a lot when force came first, and they need reaction to sound like threat. The problem for him was simple. When an officer jerks a cuffed man's arm high behind his back, the body reacts. That is not assault. That is physics. Mercer asked Darren one more direct question. He asked whether Darren had struck, pulled away, or made any threat at all. Darren said no. The videos agreed with Darren. That was the moment the stop changed from roadside misconduct to legal exposure. Harlan had no clean reason for the stop, no solid basis for the search, no contraband, no threat, and no witness video that helped him. He had force on camera and shifting explanations on audio. Mercer finally ordered the cuffs removed. No apology, just a release. Darren straightened up slowly and rolled his shoulder. He asked for badge numbers. He asked whether the stop was being documented as use of force. He asked for the supervisor's name. He was already thinking ahead, and that was smart. Once a stop goes this wrong, memory becomes a weapon. Video's the only thing that cuts through it. Harlan stood there angry, embarrassed, and still trying to look in control. But that part was over. The real damage was just starting, because Darren went home with wrist marks, shoulder pain, and the names of everyone on scene. Harlan drove away thinking he could still write the report his way. He was wrong. The dashcam was about to turn this stop into a lawsuit. The county could not laugh off. Darren Pike did not let the stop turn into a matter of memory. As soon as he got home, he photographed the marks on his wrists and the swelling in his shoulder. His wife, Nia Pike, pushed him to get checked that same night. And that turned out to be important, because the medical record fixed the injury in time before anyone inside the department could minimize what happened. The next day, Darren filed a complaint, requested the dashcam and bodycam footage, and hired a civil rights attorney named Camille Mercer. From that point on, the stop stopped being just an ugly roadside encounter and became a legal problem for the county. At first, the sheriff's office handled it the way departments usually do. They said the incident was under review. They said they took the matter seriously, and they used careful language and gave themselves room. That might have worked if the case had stayed inside their own walls. It didn't. Witness videos from the gas station were posted online within 2 days. One showed Darren already pinned against the truck, while Officer Travis Harlan kept saying he was resisting. Another showed the search of the vehicle after Darren had already been cuffed. Once those clips started spreading, the case moved beyond the department's control. Reporters started asking direct questions, and the department did not have good answers. The stop reason was unclear. The search produced nothing. and the force looked worse every time people watched it. When Camille Mercer got the official footage, the problem for the county became much more serious. The dash cam showed Darren pulling over quickly into a lit public place. That undercut the idea that he had delayed or acted evasively. The body cam showed him handing over his documents, stepping out when ordered, and keeping his tone controlled even while Harlan became more aggressive. It also showed the officer changing his explanation as the stop unfolded. That mattered because lawsuits like this are not built only on force. They are built on the full sequence, and the sequence did not help the deputy at any point. Camille filed suit in federal court. She went after the stop, the search, the force, and the county's supervision of Harlan. She argued that Darren had been detained without a solid legal basis, searched without valid justification, and handled with force that did not match the facts on scene. She also argued that the department had failed to act on warning signs long before Darren ever crossed paths with that patrol unit. That part became stronger when more information came out. Harlan had prior complaints in his file. He had been accused before of escalating routine stops and turning basic questions into confrontations. Those earlier complaints had not ended his career, and that became a problem for the county once Camille showed a pattern instead of a one-time mistake. It is always harder for a department to defend an officer when the public can see the behavior was not new. The case kept growing. Local media picked it up first. Then regional outlets did. Darren was no longer just a man from a bad stop outside Houston. He became part of a larger conversation about officers who turn routine enforcement into personal battles. The footage made that point more effectively than any press conference could. Darren had not been reckless. He had not created the danger. He had asked questions and tried to stay calm. Harlan had turned that into a reason to dominate the scene. The department placed Harlan on administrative leave, but that did little to calm public reaction. Camille Mercer then held a short press conference outside the courthouse with Darren and Nia beside her. She kept the message simple. She said this was what happened when an officer treated a citizen's calm questions as disrespect and used force to settle that feeling. Darren spoke briefly after her. He said he had not been trying to challenge anyone. He had been trying to get home. That was the line people remembered because it matched what the footage showed. The county tried to settle the matter quietly through early talks, but Camille did not let it go cheap. She had the video, the medical record, the witness accounts, and the contradictions in Harlan's own account. Once discovery started, the county's position got weaker. Harlan's training records showed he had completed the standard instruction on use of force, search limits, and de-escalation. That closed off one possible excuse. The problem was not lack of training. The problem was that he had either ignored it or thought he could get away with ignoring it. His written report made things even worse. In it, he claimed Darren had been aggressive, slow to comply, and physically resistant during a lawful detention. Camille compared that report to the timestamps and audio from the footage, and the differences were too obvious to explain away. The more closely the case was examined, the harder it became for the county to argue that this was just a messy stop handled under pressure. The case did not make it to a jury verdict. The county settled. The settlement was $6.4 million. That number was large enough to make national headlines, and it reflected more than the physical injury. It reflected the stop, the force, the search, the bad report, and the county's exposure after keeping an officer on the road despite earlier complaints. By the time the settlement was announced, the county knew it was not defending a split-second mistake. It was defending a pattern caught clearly on camera. Harlan resigned before the internal disciplinary process fully finished, but that did not protect him. The state licensing board opened decertification proceedings, and a separate review looked at whether parts of his reporting crossed legal lines. Even without a criminal conviction, His career in law enforcement was effectively over. No department looking at that footage and that lawsuit would want the risk. The fallout did not stop with him. Deputy Maya Lott was formally reprimanded for failing to intervene earlier, and the county had to explain why meaningful supervision only arrived after the damage was already done. That part mattered too, because public trust does not collapse only because one officer goes too far. It collapses when everyone around him lets him keep going. After the settlement, the county changed several policies. Supervisors were required to respond more quickly to force during low-level traffic stops. Search documentation rules were tightened. Officers were required to state stop reasons more clearly on camera, and backup officers got stronger intervention training. Those changes came late, but they came because the county had finally paid enough money to take the problem seriously. Darren did not come out of it celebrating. He came out of it with proof that what happened to him was wrong and could not be buried under paperwork. He got treatment for his shoulder. He got accountability in the one language the county could not ignore. He also heard from a lot of other people after the case became public. Some sent messages, some shared their own stories. Some said they never filed complaints before because they assumed nothing would happen. That is what cases like this do when they break open. They show people that the official report is not always the real story, and that video can force a system to face what it would rather smooth over. In the end, Darren Pike did not beat Officer Travis Harlan by out-shouting him or by trying to win an argument on the roadside. He beat him by staying controlled, documenting the aftermath, and refusing to let the